Hi. Thank you for attending today's reading. Let's begin. Say hello to my little friend. 8 comments. Share, save, hide, report. 99% upvoted. End of story. Next story. Guys, be careful of online dating as another Valentine Day approached. I knew my 40-something-year-old overweight male self wasn't at the top of the list on most females. I had a profile on every Canadian dating site, and I don't know if it's my photo or my maxed-out $14 Geek Squad job that makes women want to avoid me. However, my luck had changed when I got a hit on the Bumble dating site. She was 29 with 2 young kids. She has blonde hair, and based on her picture I would say that she was at least an 8, which is not bad considering that I'm about a 2. I was being cautiously optimistic because I know there are a lot of people who get catfished. Her name is Evelyn, and I've talked to her on the phone daily since the beginning of January. She lives 40 minutes away, and she actually invited me to her apartment. She told me that she couldn't find a babysitter, so I had no problem hanging out with her 1-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter. I went over her apartment for the first time on a Saturday afternoon. I was just amazed that Evelyn was who she said she was. She had a slight Ukrainian accent, which I thought was cool because my grandparents were Hungarian. She told me she moved to Dartmouth several years ago to escape the constant turmoil in the Ukraine. Her kids cried pretty often, especially the 3-year-old girl. Evelyn said that she's trying to teach him to speak her native tongue and English. I had a good time at her apartment despite the kids' constant crying. I really wanted to give a good impression, and so I made every effort to ignore her kids' behaviors. While I was at work the following Monday, I was delighted that Evelyn asked me if I wanted to stop by this night. I was absolutely amazed that she reached out to me again. I think I learned at this point to stay away from talking about boring topics like my job. I really didn't want to pry into Evelyn's life, but it seemed like there was little contact with the children's father, who may or may not have been giving her Evelyn money. This visit went a little better, where the kids had passed out relatively early. I really don't know much about young kids, but Evelyn told me they were cranky from teething issues. I stayed at her apartment from 5 p.m. to about 10 p.m., where we mostly watched TV with occasional small talk. I was just happy to feel like I was a part of something and someone actually wanted to be around me. As the days went on, I was almost spending every day at her apartment. I haven't made any physical advances on her yet and figured that would just come with time. We talked about Valentine's Day and some potential ideas. Evelyn told me that she had family in New York and asked if I wanted to take them with her. I figured, heck, why not? What else did I have to do that was that important? So I took the week off of work, and we would take a plane to Toronto and then a train to New York. We both agreed that taking a train ride to New York would be a great way to sightsee and spend time together. We would eventually meet up with her sister and her husband and stay at their house for a few days. I was a little nervous about meeting her family, but I didn't want to pass up an opportunity that would possibly ruin our relationship if I declined her offer. I gave Evelyn my passport so she could enter the information and buy the tickets online. I was amazed that Evelyn paid for both my plane and train ticket. We got to the Halifax airport at 6 a.m. and boarded shortly afterwards. The flight was only about 2 hours long, but the kids yelling and screaming made it seem like a 20-hour flight. We got to Toronto and made our way towards the train station. On our way to the train, Evelyn was arguing on the phone with who I assumed was the father of her children. We eventually boarded the train, and even though Evelyn seemed like she was upset, we were both Excited to head towards New York, especially because I had never been to the U.S. The kids had eventually got tired from crying. Natalia, the 3-year-old girl, was watching movies on a portable DVD player and the boy, Sasha, was playing with his Matchbox cars. We had 4 seats that faced each other, where Sasha sat next to his mother and Natalia sat next to me. The train headed towards the Niagara Customs office. Evelyn would get constant phone calls, and with each call she got more and more upset. As we approached Niagara, Evelyn got to the point where she was practically yelling on the phone in Ukrainian. So much so that she had to get up and stand outside in between the rail cars. Evelyn left the kids' paperwork with me as customs boarded the train. Evelyn remained outside and I showed the border agents the kids' birth certificates and my passport. I explained to the agent that their mother was on the phone and the agent didn't seem to mind. I put the kids' paperwork back in my pocket as we were cleared to continue to New York. We still had about a 9-hour train ride and I was small talking with Sasha as her mother was still in between the train cars on the phone. The kids and I were tired from the early plane ride and we eventually passed out. I woke up and Evelyn still wasn't back at her seat. As the kids remained asleep, I went to look for Evelyn. I exited the train car and saw that she wasn't on the platform in between the train cars. I figured maybe she just needed to cool off in a different area. I went back to the seat with the kids and Natalia was awake. I asked Natalia, "Have you seen your mommy?" Quote. Natalia responded, "No. I haven't seen mommy since school." Quote. I responded, "You saw your mommy before on the train." Quote. Natalia said, "No, my mommy took me to play with my friends at school." I figured that Natalia was watching Dora the Explorer or something and she was thinking about preschool. Sasha had woke up and I gave the kids snacks from the bag that Evelyn had brought. Evelyn still had not returned and I was getting a glimpse into her behaviors. I tried calling her phone several times and it went to voicemail. I figured she had passed out somewhere on the train. I was also starting to get a glimpse into the stress and strain that Evelyn was dealing with, and just by me being here gave her an opportunity to escape for a bit. I tried my best to keep the kids entertained. Evelyn was easy because she would just watch movies where Sasha and I played Matchbox cars together. I liked playing cars with him because as long as he was playing then he wasn't crying. I tried my best not to think about Evelyn and I kept my mind focused that she had just passed out somewhere on the train. We eventually arrived at Penn Station. I told the kids to wait in their seats until their mother came back. All the passengers had left the train and the train conductor was encouraging us to exit the train. I told the conductor that I was waiting for the kids' mother and the train conductor stated that everyone has left the train at this point. The conductor said that she was probably waiting for us outside the train in the station. So as odd as this was, I held Sasha's hand with my suitcase in my other hand and exited the train while Sasha followed me. I looked around in all directions and I didn't see Evelyn anywhere. I stood in one spot for 15 minutes thinking that maybe Evelyn had used the bathroom. But she didn't come. Then a male and a female approached us and the female said, "Sasha and Natalia. How are my loves doing?" Quote. I said, "Are you Evelyn's sister?" Quote. She said, "Yes, my name is Ruth. You must be David, right?" Quote. I said, "Yes. Nice to meet you." Then she introduced me to her husband Stan. I said, "I haven't seen Evelyn what seems like hours ago." Ruth replied, "Yeah. That's typical of Evelyn. But don't worry, let me just call her real quick." Ruth put the phone up to her ear and called Evelyn. Ruth said, "Evelyn. My darling, I'm here with David and your kids. Brief pause. Oh, okay, I'll tell David to wait for you while I take the kids and then the both of you can walk to my house. Ruth hung up the phone and said, I apologize for my sister. She ran off the train to pick me up something from the store. She said that she would be back in a few minutes and for you to wait for her while me and Stan take the kids back to our house. I replied, oh, okay, I'll wait here then. Ruth and Stan slowly walked away with the kids when I remembered that I gave Evelyn my credit card to hold. I had my suitcase that had nothing more than my clothes and passport. I patted my pockets and realized that I still had the kids' birth certificates. I had nothing else to do, so I glanced over the birth certificates. As I did that, I said, what the hell? Because at the bottom of the birth certificates my name, David LaFleur, was listed as the kids' father. My head started spinning. I knew at that moment my naive self was being used as some type of mule. I couldn't let those kids leave. I knew something was up because Ruth didn't have an accent. I quickly ran towards the four of them as they got close to the Penn Station exit. I said, you want to know something, Ruth and Stan? I'll wait with the kids until Evelyn comes back. Ruth said, don't be silly, David. We just live a couple of blocks away. We'll keep the kids entertained. I then said, no. I'm sorry. The kids will wait with me. Then Ruth said, all you are is a boyfriend. You don't know these kids. I don't feel comfortable with you staying with these kids. I then said, if you take one more step with those kids, I'll yell for the NYPD to come over. Ruth said, go ahead. You see, David, all you are is a boyfriend, and I'll explain to the cops that my sister disappeared. And I don't feel comfortable having the kids with you. Then I pulled out the kids' birth certificates and said, you see, I'm actually their father. Do you see that? Then I pulled my passport out of my bag. I then said, you know what, I'm actually going to call the NYPD over, as I half-heartedly yelled for help. Stan and Ruth both walked away. But I knew those vultures wouldn't go far. I had two young kids who I assumed were worth $1 million in some diabolical scheme. I now have the two kids and no money. Evelyn had taken my phone charger and my phone is dead. I had to figure something out regarding the kids. I didn't want to hand them over to some creeps, and I didn't want to go to the police for fear that I would be accused of knowingly going along with this plot. I figured the weather is warm and it's Valentine's Day. So I'm sure I could bring in good money by panhandling for money with two young kids. I took the kids to Times Square and within a couple of hours I made close to $300. I bought the kids food and I got a phone charger. We went to a Starbucks where I plugged my phone in. I looked at the Nova Scotian Missing Children website and I didn't find anything. So I went to Facebook, where I found a grandmother who was concerned that she hadn't seen her drug-addicted daughter or her two young grandchildren in weeks. I looked on my phone and saw the cheapest way to get back to Halifax was by renting a car. I first needed to find a TD Bank to get a debit card, which was required to rent a car in lieu of a credit card, which would talk says to get. I found a bank about a mile away and I trekked the distance while carrying two young kids. I ditched my suitcase because I couldn't carry the weight. Within 2 hours I got the debit card. Then, I walked over to Avis to rent the car. My pathetic self only had $20 in my account, so I gave Avis $175 in cash to rent the car for one day that included 2 car seats. I asked for the most fuel-efficient car because I only had about $100 left over. I put the car seats in the car and then the kids. I synchronized my phone with the car's speakers and I put kids' songs on. I then got on 95 North for the 13-hour approximate car ride. I knew I had barely just enough money for gas, so I stopped at a supermarket in Connecticut and bought the cheapest food available for the three of us. As I approached the border to New Brunswick, I was nervous because of the forged birth certificates. And the kids were crying hysterically from being trapped in the car for too long. As I pulled into the border crossing, I handed the agent my paperwork and the kids were still crying hysterically. So much so that the agent couldn't ask Natalia any questions. The agent sympathized with me for dealing with the crying kids and let me pass through. About 5 hours later, I made it back to my apartment, where I was beyond exhausted. I reached out to the grandmother on Facebook and I gave her my address to pick up the kids. When the grandmother came to my apartment, I felt a sense of relief that this ordeal would be over for the kids, and it seemed like the grandmother just wanted the kids and didn't want to ask me 10,000 questions and get the police involved. So at first I thought this was just typical behavior for the kids' mother, where the grandmother was protecting the daughter. But I knew something was off based on Natasha's reaction to the grandmother. Natasha just cried. And she didn't have any familiarity with this woman. Before the woman attempted to leave with the kids, I asked her to show me any proof in photos or anything else that these kids were her grandkids, which she didn't have. So I told her that she wasn't leaving with them without showing me some type of proof. She insistently argued with me that those were her grandkids and she was going to call the police, which I continued to tell her to call the police. But in reality, I still had 3 years of probation left for being in the same car as 5 pounds of marijuana. So thankfully she didn't call out my bluff and she just left my apartment. This Canadian seafaring town of Halifax is just one big child smuggling factory, I've concluded, which I had no idea was occurring. I thought for hours what to do, and finally I decided to take the kids to the emergency room, where I left shortly afterwards, where I concealed myself in winter-type clothing. Instead of tinkering with old computers, I now investigate missing flyers to see what the motivation of the person who hung the flyers. I never found out if Sasha and Natalia were reunited with their real family. In hindsight, I doubt that was their actual names. As far as Evelyn is concerned, I constantly search online dating sites to see if she'll reappear to try catfish someone else. End of story. That is all for today. If you want to support my automated channel, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. See you tomorrow.